Good morning, Anthony. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
I'm looking forward to having you on the show. I read one of your blogs on a common forum that we both follow, and I think was it Axion?
Axial, yeah.
Axial, that you had written something about the customer due diligence and the due diligence process, which really sparked my interest because it's something that not a lot of people think about or talk about, and they don't realize that when they're going to sell their company, a lot of buyers are going to potentially reach out to their customers, and the relationship and the interactions that they got with their customers are crazy important. So before we get going, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of your background and the background of the company and how you guys got into the unique niche that you're doing right now?
Yeah, of course. So I've been doing customer research for about 15 years. Started out my career doing healthcare qualitative research for pharmaceutical companies, medical devices, moved on to financial services, fast food, kind of burnt out on the consumer world, doing a lot of work, not seeing a lot of payoff, wanted to make a switch. So about a year ago, I came over to Strategex. Now I'm doing B2B, same skill set, same type of work, just a totally different context. And I'm specializing in our quality of customers product, quality of customers, parallel to quality of earnings, right? Where we're using voice of the customer methodology or VOC to uncover customer insights that can be used for due diligence purposes on either the buy side or the sell side. So we're going into a target company. We are interviewing their top accounts. We're ascertaining the strength of those relationships. We're determining if there's any accounts that we consider to be at risk. And more importantly, we're coming up with strategies to retain those accounts post-close, because we see time and time again. Everyone sees that that notorious statistic that 70 to 90% of deals fail, right? But we don't always ask ourselves why. And when we do, we often say, "Oh, it was an integration issue. We didn't have a good post-close strategy." In reality, what we're seeing is that one of the major drivers of a failed deal, especially in B2B situations where you have customer concentration, is that top customers walk away post-close, or they lower their spend, and the whole valuation model is shot. So our job is to go out on behalf of the buy side or the sell side and mitigate the risk of customer concentration, identify ways to ensure our top revenue generators stick around, and then in the long run, come up with ideas to further increase organic growth.
Well, and I think it's very interesting on how you guys are doing this, because I just had someone on this show recently. It was a private equity firm. They were talking and hammering the quality of earnings, because it's validating from a third party that it's legit. And I don't think a lot of people think about what you're talking about here, and until like after the fact or in the middle of the deal, or all these just unknowns that are, essentially one arm's length away, just talking to their customer. And how did you guys get into this? Because I think it's so unique.
So Strategex, we've been around since 1993, specializing in voice of the customer from day one. Since then, we've done about almost 800 voice of the customer engagements. Industry agnostic, but the common thread is everything we touch is B2B. And the reason for that is because we tend to find there's much more value in doing this type of work when you do have customer concentration, right? If you have a consumer business where one customer is equal to any other customer in terms of share of revenue, if they walk, it's not that big of a deal. There's another one to replace them, right? So I'm thinking bottled water, right? Mm-hmm. If I stop buying a certain brand, that brand's not going to suffer. If I am a customer of a jet engine manufacturer and I walk, well, that could potentially be the end of the business, right? You had a guest on a few weeks ago who 99% of his revenue was with one customer and they walked, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why we focus on B2B. How we got into this diligence game is interesting. We had a long-standing client who had been coming to us for voice of the customer work. It's a multinational, multi-division. We would do VOC work for each of their divisions. They were doing a buy and build strategy, a lot of add-ons. They were looking at a acquisition target that would put them in sort of a new space, right? So of course they did their commercial diligence. Of course they did their QOV, but they still felt like they needed an added layer of validation, right? This was a new platform they were building out, new industry they weren't totally familiar with. So they reached out and said, "Hey, can you do a VOC on a company we don't own yet?" Right? So interesting idea. So, we talked with the target, talked with the acquirer, came up with this pretty novel approach of us as a third party reaching out to a target company's customers under the guise of customer satisfaction. Right. So we would call on target companies' customers saying, hey, we're Strategex. We're here to talk to you. We want to identify ways the target company can better serve you. We never disclose a pending acquisition. Right. We position it as customer satisfaction, and we position ourselves as third party. All this means that the customers are going to give us feedback pertaining to the state of the relationship as a whole, not a reaction to the deal, which is what we have when private equity or acquirers do this internally. When they call, they have to say, hey, I'm with private equity group. We're thinking about this acquisition. Can I ask you a few questions? That's going to disrupt business as usual. Yeah, it's going to make the customer nervous. They're going to be opportunistic. They're going to know this is on the table. They might say, hey, this is great, but I need lower prices. Hey, this is great, but I need more engagement. Right? It's in their interest to do that. Yeah. When we call under the guise of customer satisfaction, they're thinking, okay, this is my chance to say what we can do to improve the customer experience, what we can do to make me more satisfied. So we're getting a more holistic, unbiased sense of the relationship. So, we did this once, really successful. The business kind of took off from there. This is about 3 years ago. Since then, we now have about 30 private equity firms we do this with and a couple dozen strategic acquirers. Really taking off. And in the last 6 months in particular, I would say we've seen a huge spike in interest in doing this, not just on buy side, but on the sell side.
Right. I was just going to ask you, so is it primarily that you're coming in as a potential buyer, representing the potential buyer, or are people kind of like what we were talking about on a previous episode that, do the quality of earnings yourself, so that way you're not having to have the potential buyer do it? Are you having people that are getting prepped, wanting to learn about their customers or business and kind of the state of the union before they even kind of prep themselves for market?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as the notion of customer diligence has become more common on the buy side, as adoption of it has increased, we're seeing that it impacts deals. It can kill deals. It can squeeze valuation. So sellers are starting to take notice, and they're starting to do this proactively, right? So leading up to sale, they'll say, hey, instead of me having a couple suitors for my company and then reaching out to my customers, why don't I just get ahead of the curve and do this myself, right? It does a couple things. It helps me determine if the time is right for sale, right? If I get feedback that indicates customers are at risk and there's systemic issues, and to turn the company around would require significant investment that might not make the investment hypothesis worthy for an acquirer, it might tell us, we've got some homework to do. Let's implement some improvements. Let's reevaluate. Let's decide if the time is optimal for sale. It also lets us control the message, right? Because think about it. As this becomes more common on the buy side, let's say you have 2 or 3 potential buyers. Chances are they're going to do this anyways. So do you really want 2 or 3 people reaching out to your customers, each doing their own customer diligence? Or do you want to be able to say, hey, I've already checked that box, hand over a customer diligence report conducted by a third party, so it puts buyers at ease, right? Mm-hmm. They're not questioning your motive if you do it internally. And so it minimizes the disruption on your customers. It minimizes the chance that they may be tipped off to the idea that something's going on. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, it lets you control the message, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody knows the state of these relationships and the nuances behind them than the people who are managing your customers. So if we can get these results and put them in context and say, yeah, they're complaining about lead times, but here's the context behind that. Here's what we're actually doing already internally. You don't have the opportunity to do that when the buyers are doing this. So it really is about message control.
Well, and you can't really fix much once the buyers are doing it.
Exactly. I mean, right. Think about it. If you do it on sell side, it's win-win. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it's on the buy side, it could be win-lose, right? It could win if it's validating and it gives the acquirer confidence to move forward. It could be lose if it's giving them second thoughts and not corroborating Q of E and other diligence they're doing. It could taint the deal or squeeze valuation. Mm-hmm. If you do it on sell side, it's a win if it's bad, because it tells you you're not ready and there's things you need to do. And if you do them, you're going to get an even better evaluation. If it's good, it's also a win because it says, hey, time's right. Let's go. We have a good story to tell.
Well, what I think is so interesting, so there's so many different ways I want to go with this because of how valuable I think this exercise is. Because I'm thinking about our last business that we had. I mean, so it was the copier services is how my dad started. We got into the IT services, the document management, and all these different like peripheral services. And I think we were at like 2,000 to 3,000 customers or something. And you always sit in these management meetings and these strategy meetings making shit up about what you think your customers think about you. And you just have no idea.
Right.
And I was in this group meeting, a peer group meeting yesterday. And one of these guys said, it was an interesting thing that he does after they win a deal. They said, why did you choose us? And why did we almost not win? And it was just like interesting because that's just one question. So think about the insights that they're getting from you, because I mean, I think there's a huge argument for our old industry that a lot of people shouldn't have gotten into like software services because it's a different business model. The customers were not necessarily needing it. There was different buyers. There was different, like all these different things that you just didn't really know. And you just went full force into something anyways, even though you didn't really know. But so maybe we'll take this in chunks, Anthony, is like when you're going through this, how does that impact, the client concentration? What insights do you get from the customers, how they buy, building on additional products and services? So kind of, maybe just start with like, what are the like huge spectrum of insights that you end up getting?
Yeah. So when we're designing this, first of all, I should say this is not market research in the sense that many people might be familiar with, right? When you take a flight or stay at a hotel, you get that email with the web survey, 2 or 3 questions. This is distinctly not that, right? Well, the way we do this is really in-depth and dynamic phone conversations, 25, 35 minutes on average, conducted by an executive interviewer, someone who has expertise in B2B interviewing with senior level decision makers. And the beauty of it is that, yes, we do prepare a discussion guide that's tailored to the objectives, but it's dynamic in their conversations. And if the customer brings something up that we didn't anticipate, we can follow that line of thought, extract insights that we weren't even expecting to hear going into it. They can also probe deeper, right? And what's nice is that it's quantitative and it's qualitative. So we are getting statistics, we are getting scores to validate. But I would argue more importantly, we're getting qualitative commentary to back up those scores. So if a customer says, hey, their product quality is a 7. Okay, so 7 out of 10, that's okay, I guess. But what makes it a 7, right? And more importantly, what can we do to make it a 10? So we're getting a nice blend of both, right? Stats, context behind the stats, but also insights for improvement. The way we design this, getting back to your question, is let's say we have a 30-minute conversation scheduled. About 5 minutes of that conversation up front is dedicated to a series of questions that we ask across almost every engagement, one of which being the Net Promoter Score, right? Industry standard metric for quantifying degree of customer loyalty. NPS is one of the very few metrics that is predictably reliable, forward-looking measurement of a company's growth potential. What's the value proposition? We ask what are the top areas for improvement, common questions across everything we do. The rest of the time on the line with the customers, remaining 25 minutes or so, is tailored to the category, the company, and specific concerns, specific objectives, specific opportunities we want to pursue. So, in some instances, we go really heavy on the customer experience, right? What are all those major touch points in the customer experience? How are we performing today? What can we do to get better tomorrow? Sometimes we go really heavy on future growth outlook, right? Is there runway for growth, right? Is there innovation opportunities? Is there opportunities to increase price? And sometimes we go really heavy on competitive benchmarking, right? Let's say we have a pretty good sense that we're strong today, and we want to understand if that strength is really a competitive advantage, or if, that strength really is on par with what others are doing. So the way we approach it from an analytical perspective is all 3 of those angles, right? We look at it from Net Promoter Score perspective, we look at it from a customer experience perspective, and we look at it from a competitive benchmarking perspective. And we never really make a conclusion. We never say there's an opportunity unless we can point to all 3 of those corners of the triangle and say there's a triangulated story here to tell. So, for example, let's take price, right? Let's say one of the objectives is, can we raise prices? Is there ceiling to increase our price?
You would directly ask them that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we would never directly ask a customer,
okay.
right? Because think about it. It's in their interest to tell us prices are too high, right? But if we ask, what are the top strengths of the company? And we ask it open-endedly, and they say price. And then when we get to the ratings, we say, how would you rate them on price? And they say, well, their price is too high. But then when we get to the competitive benchmarking exercise and we say, how are their prices compared to competitors? And they say our prices are lower than competitors. Now we have 3 data points, right?
Yeah.
We have them saying your prices are lower than competitors. Your price is one of your top strengths, and your price is too high. Well, of course they're going to say price is too high. So we kind of discount that.
Mm-hmm.
So in an instance like that, where we have 2 points indicating prices might be low relative to the value they're receiving, that's telling a story that there could be an opportunity to increase price. Mm-hmm. So we never look at this from one angle. We really try to take this triangulated approach and tell a more well-rounded story behind the insights.
That's amazing. So then, what's outside of price? I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there, whether they're literally planning on selling or not, just trying to make up their future growth, because everybody's trying to grow, whether they're trying to sell or grow. It's all the same thing, because the future buyers, want to grow it. So no matter what, this is important. What strategy and the right strategy of growth. And I think a lot, like I was saying earlier, is a lot of people sit in a room with their executives making stuff up about how they want to grow. What, do they go vertical or horizontal with their products and services? I mean, all these different things. How do you take insights from the customer if you're on the sell side on going to the clients, their ideas, or do you find new ones, or a combination of both? Maybe kind of give a couple examples of how things come to fruition, that there was confusion and then someone found clarity because of the exercise.
Yeah, a combination of both. So what we do is we ask the customers themselves, how likely are you to increase spend with this company over the next few years? And they can say it's going to increase, decrease, stay the same. We then probe a little bit deeper and we try and get an estimate of what percentage increase or decrease. And we get context behind what's driving that growth or what's driving that decline. We often hear things like, well, my customers' demand are increasing, so that's going to trickle down to the supplier. We're planning to expand internationally. We want to bring them along with us. We hear, a lot of tangential, our growth is tangential to the company's growth, right? Mm-hmm. So we're complementing that. Other situations we hear, hey, it's going to be flat and might decline because competitor X came out with this new generation of product. It's more compatible with the forward-looking innovation pipeline of our own products. We're going to put more eggs in that basket, right? That was kind of going back to the guest you had on a few weeks ago. The reason that top account left is because there was a disruption. There was a new generation of product developed. The customer was working on it internally. Competitors were working on it, and we were kind of in the blind, right? Mm-hmm. So we hear that quite often. It's also an opportunity to validate ideas, right? So if we have new product or service concepts that are sort of half-baked, and before we sink money into bringing them to market, it's a good opportunity to put those concepts in front of customers and gauge whether or not there's demand and if there's in-market potential. Because, especially in certain industries, we see that innovation is often born in a lab, right? It's mm-hmm. a function of R&D. We come up with some novel technology. We think this is groundbreaking. Customers are going to love this. We put a ton of capital into bringing it to market. It's on the shelf and
no one buys it.
No one takes it, right? Yep. Because we never asked if they wanted it. We never asked if there was a practical application. So it was innovation for the sake of innovation, with no practical application. Mm-hmm. So it's a fantastic opportunity to validate that before we get too far in the development cycle.
When I'm assuming, because I think you and I, in a previous conversation, we were talking about the digital world does this extremely well, where they ask their clients what they want. It's like, hey, if we built this or did this, would you buy it? Or they literally are asking, like, people are saying, hey, you should build this because it's complementary. So are there, something that wasn't even on someone's mind, but they, like, someone's customer says, hey, you know what? Because of their product, I mean, a lot of the times I see, because someone's service is so good, or their way of doing something is so good, that people would like them to expand into other areas? Have you seen like things come up that were totally unexpected, that someone built out a whole new product or service because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was actually a buy side deal we were working on. It was diligence. We had our standard diligence objectives, but we wanted to reserve some space at the end because part of what made this target company so attractive is they were developing a new generation of products, and they had concepts developed. So toward the end of the interview, we said, "Hey, this company's thinking about developing this line of product with these features at this price point. Is this interesting to you? Do you think your customers would want it? Does the price value equation seem to make sense?" The 2 or 3 concepts that the firm concepts that we actually put in front of customers all tanked, right? None of them were appealing. None of them were relevant. None of them really generated strong purchase intent. But we then, at the very end of the interview, asked an open-ended question. What else would you like to see the company develop? And keep in mind, this was a company with very loyal customers, performing very well on the fundamentals, strong value proposition. So customers were open to innovation. Right? I think that's an important caveat to make. If you aren't winning on the fundamentals, if you don't have a strong value prop, if you don't have loyal customers, innovation should not be your top of mind thing to do. You need to fix the fundamentals first. So that box was checked. They had permission to innovate. Customers were expecting them to do it. So this open-ended question we said, hey, what else can the company do? What else are you looking for from them? What are your pain points? What are your unmet needs? What are competitors offering that they're not? What are customers asking you for that we're not able to deliver on? We developed 200 unique new product innovation opportunities from that one question alone.
Oh my gosh.
200 unique, distinctly unique ideas that customers were saying, I'm getting requests from my own customers to offer this. Is there anything you can do to work with me to develop this? So, the 3 things we put in front of them tanked, but we got 200 other things to work on. So what actually happened is the deal went through, and what they did is with the top accounts, they actually instituted co-creation programs where engineers from the target company were on site with their customers 1 day a month, going through schematics, going through, building out product concepts, doing prototypes, bringing them out to customers. That's been extremely effective. And the future growth outlook of the company and the future growth of the company itself has far exceeded what was expected.
Well, it's so funny because the concept is so simple, Anthony, but like no one does it. And I just think of how many headaches it would have saved us. Yeah. I mean, and like, because the biggest thing is like, first of all, most owners don't know where you're going to grow and why. And then to have your customers who have the paychecks willing to pay you and tell you what to do is just like such a shift in mindset. But what I think is an interesting scenario and how in a variable what it does for the negotiation, where so if you're going in as a seller and it's price multiple of EBITDA or discounted cash flow or whatever it might be, and instead of making crap up about all the future growth potentials, you have validated saying, hey, if we do this, it's literally, you could literally forecast out additional growth opportunities that you don't have, so it gets away from the EBITDA or drives up the multiple.
Exactly. Right. Because think about when a acquirer gets a SIM or a lender document, whatever you generate to give to acquirers to tell your story, there's going to be pro formas in there. There's going to be a Q of E. There's going to be maybe one slide in there that says, hey, here's our top accounts and here's 2 or 3 quotes saying how happy they are. The second an acquirer gets that, they're going to start picking it apart, being buyers are becoming increasingly discerning.
Well, first of all, you look at that and immediately before you even see it, they're probably going BS.
Exactly.
So many people lie.
They pick it apart the second they get it. And buyers are becoming increasingly discerning about where they invest, with multiples being what they are and with holding periods extending. If they're going to sink capital into something, they want a home run, right? That 70 to 90% of deals failing stat can't fly when you're paying 10x EBITDA and you're going to hold it for 6 years. That becomes unattractive. So, they're getting increasingly discerning about this. And if you have a great financial story to tell and you can validate it with customer feedback. If you can say, the reason we're projecting a 10% increase in our top account over the next 5 years is because, look, here's 3 statistics, and here's 5 quotes to put those statistics in context directly from the hearts, the minds, the mouths of that customer themselves. That's going to make them feel a lot better about the estimates, rather than say, hey, we did some secondary research. We bought a syndicated database that said the industry is going to grow 10%. So we just extrapolated that across all of our accounts, right? No, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But if it's coming directly from the customer themselves, how can you refute that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
so it only complements what we're already doing. I'm not suggesting this is a replacement for anything. Mm-hmm. I'm suggesting this is a way to validate those critical components of diligence we have to do anyways.
Well, and I'm just thinking too about, like, if you got this pro forma and you got your clients buying, they're saying that they're going to pay for something that you are going to develop because they told you to develop it. Have you ever seen it where, and this kind of goes down the road, and I'm curious on your thoughts on, there's the contracts, because you got client concentration. That's usually an issue with a lot of companies. And then you got lack of contracts or different types of contracts. But then let's say, before we go down that route, if you have I'm just thinking of some of my old customers or some of my clients, big customers, that they kind of have that partnership like you were just talking about, where they get that co-engineering or whatever. Have you ever seen a customer finance someone's new product or service? Because, then the question is, how do you finance or, fund the new product or service, something like that. But have you ever seen someone, because the customer bought in and sold themselves and what they wanted, actually prepay or something like that for something?
Can't say I have a specific example for that. I would say that
it's an option.
Yeah, it's an option. I can't say I've seen that firsthand.
Because I'm just thinking, there's a couple examples in my head that I was thinking of where, it's a potential conversation to be had, because if they want it that bad and they're willing to partner up, I mean, you could co-finance it together, which, I think I'm just thinking in terms of, if you're the seller and you've got all these different things and you've built this plan, I mean, pitching it to a potential buyer is extremely valuable.
Yeah. I shouldn't say that. I guess I've seen one example, and I think you have to be careful. If it's a new product service being developed exclusively for a certain customer, we have seen instances where a joint venture was established between a company and supplier to bring that to market, share some of the expenses. But I think that's pretty isolated to. I've seen that in pharmaceutical medical devices a few times, where the development costs are exorbitant. Right. They can go down it together under the assumption that there's exclusivity. But I would say for most of what we work on, most of these like lower middle market, B2B, manufacturing, distribution type companies, I wouldn't say that's too common.
So then I guess the second part of that question, or where that was originally coming from, was, a lot of these, I interviewed a woman named Vicky that they were doing some pre-work a couple years in advance, and they had very large customers and large concentration because they had few. Where in this process do you look at the contracts that they might have? Because you might have a client, a concentration issue, but how do you help them figure out what to do about that?
Yeah, so we don't focus too much on the contracts. That tends to be handled in more of a legal diligence aspect. I think what we can provide in terms of customer insights is, yes, there's contracts, but I think this safety net, a perceived safety net of long-standing customer relationships implies that for some reason the customer is stable and loyal. That's where our insights can shed some light, because we might say, hey, buyer, don't worry. They've been with us for 20 years. They're not going anywhere. Well, they may have been with you for 20 years because you developed a niche product and they've needed you. They're the only one that can do it, but they've moved on and they don't need you anymore, right? They might have that 20-year relationship because, we know people don't do business with companies. They do business with other people, and their account rep left. So maybe they're not as stable as we think. So I think that's where we lend more value, is going into situations where we think we have stable accounts by virtue of longstanding relationships, and we start asking questions and we find they are not loyal at all, right? I presented a diligence report just on Wednesday, 2 days ago. Small manufacturing company in the Northeast. 3 customers were 80% of revenue. 1 customer was 48% of revenue. Longstanding relationships. 2 of those top 3 were considered to be at risk. One of them told us outright that they were 1 to 2 months out from onboarding a new supplier that they were going to give 50% of the business to. The others, and the reason for that was poor lead times, never met delivery dates. The other at-risk account saw a 5 to 10% decline in spend over the next 15 years because the component that the company was manufacturing for them was going into equipment that they were planning to phase out. And these were two accounts that they had 20 plus year relationships with, that right. Both of them were either in the process of giving business away or planning to do it so in the next year. So I think the beyond contracts, which are I'm not discounting the importance of looking at those yep. From a customer perspective, it's digging into these longstanding relationships and figuring out whether or not they really are stable.
Well, and I think you bring up you mentioned an interesting point about people do business with people, and more so than businesses. And I think so how have you, what insights have you seen when, I'm just thinking about the kind of the different relationships that we used to have, where you'd have like account reps or major account reps that would have primary relationships, right? And then you're trying to figure out who should stay and who should go, and who is potentially, for your employees with a potential buyer. And then also, so how do you figure out the dynamics of those relationships that the customers interact with? Because there's touch points within the business, and then also a layer above that or below that is a lot of entrepreneurs are the hub and spoke. To John Warlow's built to sell terminology, where the owner is touching a lot of these big suppliers or the customers. So what have you seen in there, and whether they validate that? Because I think a lot of business owners go, I have to call these customers because they only like me. So what kind of insights, and how do you address those kind of situations?
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of using a third party, is because when someone objective is reaching out, someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the relationship, the customer is going to give us more candid feedback on sensitive topics like personnel, like prices, like competitors. So we absolutely dig into this in two fronts. The first is from a primary contact perspective. So what we have the customer do is tell us who they consider to be their primary day-to-day contact. We don't give them a name. It's always interesting to see who they think it is. Mm-hmm. We get a satisfaction rating on their performance. We identify what they can do better. We get ratings on, how well do they know your business? How strong of a partner are they? How well do they communicate with you? So we're able to understand individual performance of people, which is helpful when you're making those HR decisions later on. Right. We also approach it from an engagement perspective. So beyond your day-to-day contact, beyond your doing your business as usual, how do you rate the company with the level of engagement overall? Senior level engagement, frequency of meetings. Are they partner or are they more of a vendor? Are we the go-to for challenging projects, for innovation projects? So we're able to get, the nuance of the day-to-day, while also understanding if there's enough engagement from senior level people. As you can imagine, there's implications from staffing perspective, but also implications from how we manage these accounts going forward, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly to your point, in family businesses where they're looking to exit and the primary contact is the founder, the CEO, has been there for 40 years. He's not going to be around anymore. How much, gravitas does he have? How much weight does he carry? Is the value proposition really anchored in his or her expertise? Mm-hmm. Right? If that person walks, and if one of our top strengths is our expertise in the area, do we need to shore that up with a really strong operating partner, for example? So a lot of ways to think about it from a engagement and just day-to-day perspective.
Well, yeah, so my mind's spinning because, as you're getting all of this insights from the horse's mouth, how do you filter through all this stuff? Because you have everything from growth strategies to client, relationships to innovations to, relationships to all of this stuff. Like, how do you filter through all this and say, okay, should I actually bring this to market? Should I not? What should I actually, do in my business? How do you prioritize and clear through all that?
Well, we try and make it as digestible for our clients as possible. We have an incredibly talented team of analysts who know how to pour through thousands of pages of content and highlight what matters the most and put together really compelling summaries. But we also the reports are helpful, but they tell you the data in aggregate, right? X% say this is a theme we're seeing. So those reports, while essential, when we actually hand out the individual transcripts, right? Because remember, these are phone conversations. We're able to create transcripts of the conversations, nearly verbatim transcripts of what customers are saying. After we do the presentation of the report, which is the results in total, we then break out with the relationship owner for those accounts that we spoke with, and we give them the transcript and we have them read it. And once they see what customers said, the context in which they said it, that's what really drives it home. And that's where they take ownership for it. The ones that are vested in the success of their clients will take it to heart. They'll act on it. It's really eye-opening in that sense. So it's a function of us being able to tell a really great story with the data, but it's also a function of, distributing the results on an individual basis and trusting that the people we have running these relationships are doing their jobs and they're doing what's best for their customers, and they're going to take this to heart and not make excuses out of it, not get defensive, but really consider it an opportunity to just strengthen the relationships that they have.
So what are the biggest challenges that you see people have being able to, do you see a lot of people implement what you're giving back and like pushing the sale off, or, focusing more on growth, or, what are some of the big hurdles that people have?
Yeah, we haven't done enough on the sell side to come up with a statistic that we're comfortable disclosing yet. On the buy side, where we've done several of these, we can say with confidence that 15% of our customer diligence engagements on the buy side results in either the deal not going through or the valuation being adjusted. So it's certainly carrying.
Can I ask you one clarifying question on that?
Yeah,
so the deal not going through, the deal not going through and the price is being adjusted. So because you're representing the buyer, and this is for the sellers that are out there, the entrepreneurs that have their companies and are thinking from the other side, is it because there was so much risk that they canceled the deal and that the valuation went down because of how well you guys are peering into the customers? How often is it a good thing for the seller versus, from the seller's perspective, not the buyer's perspective?
Yeah, it's a good thing for the seller. When this is being done by an acquirer, it's a good thing for the seller based on, our work 85% of the time. 85% of the time, it validates what you're asking for.
Got it.
It gives a buyer the confidence to move forward. 15% of the time, it gives the buyer leverage to negotiate against you.
Got it.
Right? 100% of the time, we're coming up with areas for improvement, right? We're coming up with things we can do better. We're coming up with recommendations, but only 15% of the time are the things that we're uncovering so systemic and so insurmountable that the buyer either says, hey, this is off the table, or the buyer says, I'm still going to go through, but considering how much I'm going to have to sink into this, considering margin compression that might come along with it, considering I might have to extend my holding period, all those things that they're thinking about, they'll say, hey, I'll still go through, but I want a haircut on the price.
Mm-hmm. So from the seller's perspective, and actually from the two different ways to answer or to ask this question, and probably to answer it, is because of all the different projects and the initiatives that come out of this, Anthony, who ends up implementing them? So if you're the seller and you're just a solar entrepreneur, you might have an executive team, some other resources, who ends up implementing and prioritizing these things? There's the EOS or traction that's, very commonly known around the Midwest and is kind of percolating throughout the US, but, there's certain ways to, prioritize things and then drive specific projects. So the entrepreneur, how do they implement it? And then the buyers, because of the sophistication, do they usually take and run it with them themselves, or what happens after the fact?
Yeah. So, what we always do, we acknowledge the fact that, yes, this is diligence. This checks the box on your diligence checklist. But the way we actually position it, and that when I was talking about that story that we put together, we're putting together two stories. We're putting together a diligence story. So we're thinking risk mitigation, but we're also putting together, knowing that when we do this, 85% of the time the deal goes through, we're also putting together a value creation story. So of all the things that we're hearing, of all the insights we're collecting, assuming the deal goes through, what are the 3, 4, 5 strategic opportunities that the company can pursue once the deal goes through. And we put that in, from an outsider perspective, priority order. So we give you 5 things to work on. We give tools, we give templates, we give guidance on how to implement them. It's not like we do the report and we check out, right? We do the report, we make it forward looking, and then we're available to assist in the implementation of those recommendations that we make.
Is there, with all the data that you guys are gathering from different industries and different companies, is there common trends that you're seeing out there from people that are doing things really well, or common trends that are coming out of this? And I know that's probably a pretty broad brushstroke, but any major unique things that are kind of eye-opening for you guys?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing recently is that if you are not just absolutely killing it on the fundamentals, quality, lead times, delivery, right? If there's going to be lapses in those things, that's okay, so long as there is communication and there is problem resolution, right? We acknowledge the issue, we tell you about it, we fix it, we tell you what we did to fix it, we tell you what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. Customers they know we're going to make mistakes. They're fine with that. They're expecting it. But I think over the past few years, there has been a dedication to improving customer experience, and customers' expectations are increasing. So if we're going to have these lapses, we better make sure we're handling it well. If we don't, not only does it discredit us on the fundamentals, it's interesting. We're hearing more and more that these issues, if left unchecked, really diminish the trust and integrity in the company themselves. And once customers question your integrity, once they don't hold you to your commitments, once they question if you're really trustworthy, that's where the relationship gets to the point where it's not repairable. And that's where we see accounts being at risk. And that's where we see customers, like I was talking about earlier, saying, I'm giving 50% of their business to someone else because they're terrible on lead times and delivery, and I just don't trust them anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. So we have to be really, really sensitive to the fact that when issues happen, that's okay, as long as we resolve it and we communicate it. I think that's one interesting trend that we're seeing.
Isn't it interesting, Anthony? It's such a basic fundamental of just human behavior. Like, just communicate. I mean, we're all going to screw stuff up, right? But just admit it, own it. And then, even if your lead times are not hitting the mark, tell them, and then they can accommodate, and then they still trust you, even though you're screwing stuff up.
Exactly. And if there's trust, that you can still build on that. Once that integrity is gone, the relationship's gone. I think another interesting trend is that, again, we do a lot of B2B, lower mid market. So my examples might sound a little redundant, but we work with a lot of companies that have longstanding relationships, and these are customers that have been ordering the same piece for 20 years, and they fax in their order every week, and that's it, right? So we think, oh, things are working fine. This is the way we've been doing business forever, and it's working for us. It's profitable. We're seeing some growth. When you actually talk to the customers, they want more. They still want engagement. Even though it might be a rote relationship, it's on autopilot. They do feel neglected. They do want to see more. And, even though it might be an inconvenience for us, it's extra cost for us. It's super important to maintain relationship, not just at the primary contact level, but also at the senior level, engagement level. Because the minute they need a new piece, they're not going to think of you as their go-to supplier. They're going to think of the person that's on site every quarter, visiting with them, doing the networking with them, the ones that have that partnership status, not the ones that they fax the order to once a week.
Well, what's interesting too, Anthony, and I'm just going to highlight one of the words that you said, because I think it rings true in a lot of entrepreneurs' heads, is this: it's extra costs. And I think what you were referring to and relating is that it's an investment, and it's almost a better investment than any marketing dollar you'll ever spend. Because again, they're going to tell you, they're going to buy. It's a necessary thing, and it's an investment to keep your business going and to keep your future growth strategy.
Yep, absolutely. And it's a whole lot cheaper than if you lose that customer and you have to go out and acquire a new one.
Right. So, we've touched on a lot of different things, and I think it's just a crazy, awesome thing that you guys are spearheading in the marketplace. Is there, if you were to think, if you're an entrepreneur on the sell side, and you were thinking, I'm not really sure where in the next year or two, what I'm going to do, how do I go through this? What is one thing that you'd highlight to make sure that they totally take away, or if there's one thing that we've missed throughout this, what do you think it would be?
Listen to your customers, right? It's such a simple thing, but it's not done that often, right? If you're going to put yourself up for sale, 2 or 3 years out, right? This isn't something you wake up and the next day, you're putting together documents. This is something that we know a few years out. There's ample time to check in with our customers, get a sense of the state of the relationships, identify what we can do better, and hopefully put together a really compelling story to tell that validates our financial story and all the other types of diligence we're doing. This can be a very simple thing that's done internally. It could be a more complex thing that's done with the assistance of a consultant, but no matter how you choose to do it, you have to do it, right? Customer expectations are increasing. Buyers are more discerning. The adoption of customer diligence on the buy side is pretty common. Chances are they're going to do it themselves. So why not get ahead of the curve, do it ourselves, control the message?
And, one last question, because I think there's probably a lot of people out there. What if you're scared to death about what your customers are going to say?
Then you're not ready to sell.
Right.
Right.
But what if I think, no, I totally agree with you. But what if if you're just sitting there and if someone's listening right now and they know that they probably got problems and they just don't even want to necessarily hear that? How do you overcome that anxiety or that stomach?
So, think about, I think what's interesting, and you probably have more to provide on this, but a lot of times I don't suspect sellers realize how much it costs them to go through this process, right? This isn't something where all the costs are on the buy side. Sellers incur a good portion of the expense for doing this. So if you're afraid of it, take the emotion out of it, right? Mm-hmm. Think about it from a more rational financial perspective. If you already know that you're going to get hammered by your customers, and if we have a fairly good sense that at some point the buyer is going to talk to our customers anyways, why wait until we're under LOI when we're so close to the finish line? Right? We've worked for years to get here. We're 90 days out from closing. The buyer says, "Hey, give me your customer list. I want to make some calls." That's not the time to find out. The time to find out is when you're in control, when you can still do something about it.
Yep. Very well said. If there's a good way for our listeners to get in touch with Anthony, what would be the best way?
Yeah, it's strategex.com, or you can reach me directly at abahr@strategex.com.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a blast.
Yeah, I appreciate it.